Martin Luther King Jr. was born on 15th January 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia. Martin Luther King Jr. was the middle child of Michael King Sr. and Alberta Williams King. The King and William families were rooted in rural Georgia. Martin Jr.'s grandfather, A.D. Williams, was a rural minister for years and then moved to Atlanta in 1893. He took over the small, struggling church with around 13 members and made it into a forceful congregation. He married Jenny Parks and they had only one child that survived, Alberta. In 1948, Martin Luther King Jr. earned a sociology degree from Morehouse College and attended the liberal Crozer Theological Seminar in Chester. He thrived in all his studies and was valedictorian of his class in 1951 and elected student body president. He also earned a fellowship for graduate study, but Martin also rebelled against his father's more conservative influence by drinking beer and playing pool while at college. He became involved with a white woman and went through a difficult time before he could break off the affair. During his last year in seminary, Martin Luther King Jr. came under the guidance of Morehouse College president Benjamin E. Mays, who influenced King's spiritual development. Mays was an outspoken advocate for racial equality and encouraged King to view Christianity as a potential force for social change. After being accepted at several colleges for his doctoral study, including Yale and Edinburgh in Scotland, King enrolled in Boston University. During the work on his doctorate, Martin Luther King Jr. met Coretta Scott, an aspiring singer and musician, at the New England Conservatory School in Boston. They were married in June 1953 and had 4 children. In 1954, while still working on his dissertation, King became pastor of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church of Alabama. He completed his Ph.D. and was awarded his degree in 1955. King was only 25 years old then. In 1959, with the help of the American Friends Service Committee and inspired by Gandhi's success with non-violent activism, Martin Luther King visited Gandhi's birthplace in India. The trip affected him in a deeply profound way, increasing his commitment to America's civil rights struggle. African-American civil rights activist Bayard Rustin, who had studied Gandhi's teachings, became one of King's associates and counseled him to dedicate himself to principles of non-violence. Rustin served as King's mentor and advisor throughout his early activism and was the main organizer of the 1963 March on Washington. In February 1960, a group of African American students began what became known as the Sit-In Movement in North Carolina. The students would sit at racially segregated lunch counters in the city's store. When asked to leave or sit in the colored section, they just remained seated, subjecting themselves to verbal and sometimes physical abuse. The movement quickly gained traction in several other cities. Martin Luther King Jr. encouraged students to continue use non-violent methods during their protests. Out of his meeting, the Students' Non-Violent Coordinating Committee formed and for a time worked closely with SCLC. By August of 1960, the sit-ins had been successful in ending segregation at lunch counters in 27 southern cities. By 1960, Martin Luther King Jr. was gaining national notoriety. He returned to Atlanta to become co-pastor with his father, but also continued his civil rights efforts. On October 19, 1960, King and 75 students entered a local department store and requested lunch counter service, but were denied. when they refused to leave the counter area, King and 36 others were arrested. Realizing the incident would hurt the city's reputation, Atlanta's mayor negotiated the truce and charges were eventually dropped. But soon after, King was imprisoned for violating his probation on traffic conviction. The news of his imprisonment entered the 1960 presidential campaign when candidate John F. Kennedy made a phone call to Coretta's Scott King. Kennedy expressed his concern for King's harsh treatment for traffic ticket and political pressure was quickly set in motion. King was soon released. On 20th August 1963, the historic March on Washington drew more than 200,000 people in the shadow of Lincoln Memorial. It was here that King made his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. By 1968, the years of demonstration and confrontations were beginning to wear on Martin Luther King Jr. He had grown tired of marches, going to jail, and living under the constant threat of death. He was becoming discouraged at the slow process civil rights in America and the increasing criticism from the other African American leaders. Plans were in the works for another march on Washington to revive the movement and bring attention to the widening range of issues. During that march, while standing on a balcony outside his room, Martin Luther King Jr. was struck by a sniper's bullet. The killing sparked riots and demonstrations in more than 100 cities across the country. After his death, he is the most widely known African American leader of his era. His life and work have been honored with a national holiday, schools and public buildings named after him, and a memorial on Independence Mall in Washington, D.C. Thank you for watching Edupedia World. Please subscribe to watch more videos.